Hey, welcome to Beyond Organic Wine, a soil punk investigation of wine, a counterculture revolution of wine informed by ecology, a 21st century reckoning with the realities of the world that we live in and need to make wine for. Beyond Organic Wine hopes to inspire you with new and alternative ways of thinking about and practicing wine, and hopes to give you knowledge and resources that can help you become a leader in the future of wine. A future that is dynamic, diverse, and delicious. If you don't know me, I'm Adam Huss. Thank you so much for listening. This is an epic 2-hour interview, and the entirety of it is available for everyone. No paywall, thanks to a really special sponsor I'm about to tell you about. But if you listen to this and it keeps you company while you bottle or shoot thin or sit in traffic between client tastings or wherever you are, and you appreciate the questions we're asking that you really don't hear asked many other places in wine, please consider subscribing to the Beyond Organic Wine Substack to support what we do here. You can do it easily on the Substack app or at beyondorganicwine.substack.com. Beyond Organic Wine exists because of the support of listeners like you, and I'm incredibly grateful for you and humbled by those of you who make this possible. Thank you. This episode features an amazing wine grower and winemaker in the state of Virginia, and I wouldn't be surprised if after you hear the story and approach to wine, you'll probably wish you could go visit Virginia and experience the exciting things that are happening in wine there. And the sponsor for this episode can help make that happen in a really cool way. Shifting Gears Travel takes many of the concepts that are recurring themes on this podcast and brings them to life on easygoing, guide-led bicycle tours to Beyond Organic wineries and regenerative flower farms. The business is named Shifting Gears not only for the tie to bicycles, but also because the themes that infuse the tours and the conversations and the concepts that you'll see firsthand on the farms and get to taste will hopefully get your mental gears turning about how you can be part of the ecological revolution in wine. Imagine taking one of Shifting Gears' flagship tours in the shadow of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Imagine cycling past gorgeous horse farms with views up to Shenandoah National Park and riding to thoughtfully chosen winery destinations for tastings, healthy seasonal foods, vineyard walks, and explorations of where the wine world once was, where it is today, and where it is headed. Jeff Dion is your guide and the owner of Shifting Gears Travel, and part of why I'm really happy to promote Shifting Gears, besides its ecological focus, is because Jeff is a genuinely delightful human who I know personally. We've been talking for years, and he visited my magical wine forest farm while he was in New York guiding bike tours in the Finger Lakes. And he also is the first reader of Wine Liberated, my book that's coming out soon. And by the way, a bicycle is the most efficient form of transportation on Earth. So if you want to do some of the most beautiful, earth-friendly, heart-healthy, and mind-expanding wine bar hopping, let Jeff show you around Virginia wine country. You can find Shifting Gears at sgtrips.com and on Instagram at Shifting Gears Travel. And Jeff is offering 15% off through the 2026 season for you listeners of the Beyond Organic Wine podcast. Just write in Beyond Organic Wine at checkout during the 2026 season, and you'll receive a 15% refund after signing up. Now, my guest for this episode is Tim Jordan, who is a co-founder of and winemaker and consultant for Commonwealth Crush in Virginia. From overseeing wine-growing brands Star Party and Midland in Augusta County to his winemaking and vineyard responsibilities at Commonwealth Crush, Tim has his finger on the dynamic pulse of Virginia wine. Born and raised in the Shenandoah Valley, he holds a PhD in entomology from Virginia Tech with a focus on grapevine insects. This specialized knowledge and passion for Virginia wine growing has propelled him through numerous roles in the industry over the years, including as vineyard manager for Michael Schaap's Wineworks, winemaker at Barren Ridge Vineyards, consultant at Shenandoah Vineyard Services, and now co-founder of Commonwealth Crush. Tim is also part of the grape breeding program in Virginia in collaboration with USDA that is developing new grape varieties that can successfully produce delicious wine within the unique regional limitations and challenges that grapes face in Virginia. I wish every state had one of these programs. I have a special relationship with Virginia in a way. Virginia is the setting for the first episode of the Beyond Organic Wine podcast, which I highly recommend listening to if you haven't. And it's the setting for chapter 1 of my book, Wine Liberated. That's because Virginia is one of the oldest wine regions in the U.S., and it's simultaneously one of the most difficult places to grow wine on Earth. So the lessons we learn from the folks growing wine there organically, ecologically, or regeneratively, and there is a growing group of winemakers who are, these are lessons that can be applied broadly across most of the wine growing world. But Virginia is also a place where vinifera culture has been and continues to be heavily invested in. Enormous amounts of resources are given every year to trying to produce wine from Vitis vinifera in Virginia. This is a product of a colonized wine culture that defines wine as the fermented juice of varieties of Vitis vinifera only, and it's time we call this what it is, utter and unsustainable folly. Yet, as you'll hear, this is what most people learn as we begin our journey into wine. I did. And so Tim's journey began by planting and growing vinifera in Virginia. But 20 years on, Tim has learned too much to go back. He won't plant vinifera again for his wine. And he's setting an example I hope more and more growers in Virginia and around the world follow. This theme is merely background, however, for an in-depth look at a thoughtful, community-focused, ecologically informed journey to grow wine in one of the most challenging wine regions on earth. There is so much in this. Enjoy. Tim, welcome. Thank you so much for being on the Beyond Organic Wine podcast. And I'm really looking forward to talking to you, like sort of getting to know you. And to start off, could you introduce yourself and where you are in the world and what you do there?
Well, thank you so much, Adam. I love having this conversation with you. My name is Tim Jordan. I am a grape grower, winemaker, sort of farm steward in Virginia. In the Shenandoah Valley, I have a family farm. We raise about 12 acres of grapes split between hybrids and vinifera. We have a family winemaking project based off of that. But I'm also in partnership with my brother, Ben Jordan, who is a winemaker and sort of industry professional in his own right. But we started a company called Commonwealth Crush in Waynesboro, Virginia, which is also in the Shenandoah Valley. And over the past 20 years or so, we have both learned how to be grape growers, how to be winemakers, and ultimately we're creating these spaces that is elevating everyone to the same place.
That's great. Yeah. I grew up near Waynesboro, Pennsylvania, which is just north of the border, probably only a couple hours from Waynesboro, Virginia. I mean, for people around the world who don't know anything about Virginia, I'm just going to throw it out there that from my knowledge of Virginia and other places that grow grapes around the world, I'm going to say Virginia might be one of the hardest places to grow grapes in the world. What do you think about that?
Um, I would agree, but also I have such a great lack of experience across the world as far as growing grapes is concerned. Um, and just by virtue of being born and raised in Virginia and just kind of having this element of this is what I've got to work with, it certainly is challenging. We have various different climates and geology, topography throughout Virginia. We have sort of a tidewater, ocean influenced element. We have a Piedmont, which is sort of rolling hills, sort of the detritus of the old Blue Ridge Mountains. And then we have the Shenandoah Valley and then the mountains and highlands. And so you have all of these various climates and growing season constraints that are all compounded by the excessive humidity and subtropical climate that we work within.
Right. Yes. Subtropical climate with everything that goes along with that in terms of humidity and fungi, mildew pressures, um, insect pests. I mean, you're mild enough that you have pretty much every insect pest that might plague a grapevine, and at the same time, you get both hurricanes and tornadoes pretty regularly. You also have frosts. You can get early frosts and late frost in the spring, early frost in the fall. Sometimes you can get pretty brutal winters, but also scorching summers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And every vintage is different. There is not one sort of continuing truth about a given vintage, whether it's humidity or rainfall, heat content, all of that changes, and the dynamics of that make every vintage challenging as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, not too long ago. I mean, you guys. I mean, it's not unheard of to get close to 100 inches of rain during a growing season.
Yeah, and it's not unheard of to get like 30 inches of rain over a couple of days.
Just okay. Just wanted to paint that picture for everybody. So, the level of somebody from California thinking about their the problems that they have. They're it's sort of very. It's like California problems. Like we should have a whole thing like that in viticulture where people are like, "Oh, that sounds like California problems." Sort of like first world problems or whatever the thing used to be. Uh, um, well,
But I was going to say, I love watching sort of organic vignerons from California on Instagram or any of those social feeds proclaiming, why don't you do it this way? And
right, right. Well, let's talk about that. Yeah. So, I mean, let's talk about your farming because that definitely, I mean, obviously, this climate influences what you can and can't do there, especially with vinifera. I think it's fair to say it maybe you could grow vinifera organically there, but it would be a fool's errand, right? Like it would basically be more pollutive and costly than you know just I mean like than anything like from an ecological standpoint, like it seems like using systemic fungicides and things like that is almost an imperative unless you want to break the bank, use tons of diesel fuel and use, just like douse your soil with copper. Is that fair to say?
I think that's probably fair to say, but at the same time, I do not want to step on any toes because there are individuals within our industry who are working with vinifera and are trying to do organic practices, if not full organic.
Okay.
And while that is incredibly challenging in this climate, there is sort of you have to acknowledge that you're you're kind of trying to build some resilience in the system and you're not really optimizing it for your yield purposes. And so, yes, folks are growing things organically, but they might only be getting a quarter of ton per acre. And
Right,
so,
right.
from an economic resilience or sustainability, that might not quite fit, but that may be what people are after. And if they can make wine and make money off of that, maybe there is some resilience there.
Yeah, right. I shouldn't be too categorical in in what I'm saying, but yeah, and I love your nuance that way. Well, what has been your journey? I know that sort of Virginia farming and even wine almost is like an inheritance for you. Is that fair to say, or like what's your story? I should just ask. Let you.
Well, yeah, that is a good way to say it, in that our family has sort of consistently farmed this farm in Fort Defiance, Virginia, in the Shenandoah Valley for a couple hundred years. And our first ancestor that came to this area was called to a church, and through that calling as a pastor, he was granted land, and
Hmm.
that land has sort of persisted through time in our family, and we are the present stewards of this land. Um, but almost 20 years ago, at the time, our grandparents had moved to the farm as really a place to come and live the rest of their lives. But it was where my grandfather was born. He was the last generation to be born here. The next generation was my daughter, and so we've had this farm that's been part of our family, but it hasn't been part of our lives. And so it wasn't until maybe our 20s and in some cases our 30s that we really came to know and love this farm. And
Hmm.
that became possible through our grandfather or grandmother asking this question, what do we do now?
Hmm.
Because back then, using cattle to graze the lands to pay your taxes was enough to subsist, but otherwise, what are you doing? What are we doing with this farm? And so that's when my brother Ben, our other brother Grayson, our families together, our father especially Ted, we came together collectively and said, "Hey, grape seems to be like this burgeoning sort of commodity in Virginia. Why don't we explore it?" And so this was 2006 that we ordered our first vinifera vines. We were completely green at what we were doing. We knew nothing about growing grapes. We were not individuals who grew up in agriculture or around it. So driving a tractor was the first time for all of us. All
Hmm.
these elements of farming, both the lack of humility or just the realization that we wanted to do things, but we had no knowledge of how to do it.
Hmm.
Um, and so that was the beginning. And what we did was over 10 years, we planted probably 30 different vinifera varieties on our farm, really to explore what grew best, what was best suited to the site, to the geology, and to our growing season. But also, um, we're taking our time because we didn't know what we were doing. It took us almost 4 or 5 years before we could call ourselves grape growers, because over the first 3 years we were organic and we didn't know what organic meant, but we thought it meant not spraying your vinifera. And vinifera don't survive in Virginia under that regime. Uh, But what we did learn through all of that time is this element of experimentation and sort of observe before acting. And a lot of that is so much of my philosophy too, is that we have to make all of these observations before we just go out and plop a giant vineyard on a piece of ground. And what we did was we settled on five distinct varieties that were best suited to our site. And I say that best suited, like Cabernet Franc here in the Shenandoah Valley, it's on the cusp. We don't always ripen that variety. Whereas Blaufränkisch, which is an inspiration from the Finger Lakes, Blaufränkisch always ripens for us, and it's a beautiful, beautiful variety for the site.
Hmm.
Riesling, Chardonnay, Petit Manseng, but things
Yeah.
like Cabernet Sauvignon or Pinot Noir, they were too far outside of the reasonable spectrum of what would work for our site. And now we're 20 years into that process. We still feel good about our vinifera selections, but we wish we never planted vinifera in the first place.
Well, that's part of the journey, right? I went through the same process myself. Um, and it's tough when, I mean, you've done it at acres level. I probably, by virtue of not having acres to play with, got lucky and made my, mistakes on a Los Angeles yard. But when did you start thinking outside of vinifera? Like what was that journey? What was that process?
Yeah, my my background is I had a lot of education. I left college and I went to Virginia Tech and I studied insects that eat field corn for my master's degree.
Hmm.
And that was sort of at the beginning of our discussion about growing grapes. And I knew at that time too that I wanted to be in fruits. I wanted to work with insects that eat fruits. And so I did my master's on field corn and Japanese beetle and European corn borer. It's not a great commodity to work in, but it's an important commodity nonetheless.
Hmm.
And I had the opportunity for my doctorate to work with Dr. Doug Pfeiffer, who is the fruit entomologist of his time for Virginia Tech.
Hmm.
And through that process, I worked with growers throughout the state of Virginia, studying this insect called greatberry moth.
Hmm.
It's an endemic species to North America. You don't find it much west of the Rockies. But this small moth led me across the state of Virginia. I worked with growers throughout the state, probably 50 in total, and I really developed sort of these relationships with individuals who then became my mentors. And I'm speaking initially to folks like Jim Law and Jeff White, but also just individuals like Jake Bushing and Matthew Finot. Uh, those folks, they gave me an opportunity to throw my kind of zany ideas of insect monitoring, insect pest management, um, out into the world and collect some data for me. And ultimately, I just fell in love with the industry so much that despite my dissertation committee's greatest question, Tim, what are you going to do after this? You say you want to be a farmer, and we've just spent all these resources on you to get your dissertation. What are you going to do? And I think that was a little short sighted on their part because they wanted me to be an academic. They
Right.
wanted me to teach and publish papers and do research. And I mean, honestly, I love that stuff. But my heart was led into the Virginia wine industry. And so, through stepping stones from being a vineyard management consultant to a full on winemaker, back to vineyard management consultant, and now today as like a winemaker and vineyard management consultant for Commonwealth Crush. Uh, there was an evolution that happened really after I took my first visit to Europe.
Mm.
And I visited Domaine de Boudon in Valais, Switzerland.
Okay.
And it's this small domain up on the side of the Alps or the foothills of the Alps, essentially, in Valais. And everything they did there was biodynamic. They grew some of the herbs for the product Ricola, and they also practiced biodynamics on their grapevines. And then they had this sort of overall holistic sort of island amidst everything else.
Yeah.
And to me, knowing wine very conventionally before that, knowing grape growing very conventionally, coming out of this industrial complex of agriculture that is instilled in you, I would say, in academia, um, I really had to like be open and break that mold, and that openness came from just new experiences.
Mm.
And so it was after that that I took a seminar on biodynamics at Old Westminster. This was 12, 15 years ago with Drew Baker. I love Drew Baker. I love that whole family. But through what they did, what they did just with that one seminar, it propelled me to start taking practicums of biodynamics,
Okay.
and that was around 2016 that I started very intensively learning biodynamics, and that was the element, that switch that forced me to change my thinking. That said, conventionals are icky, and there's got to be a better way.
Mm. So, I mean, there's so many there's so many questions for you. Um, what was it about? Like, so what I heard you like the vision that I have, like the impression that I imagine you having from the Swiss place Domaine de Baudon or whatever, however, whatever it's called specifically. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it or whatever, but seems like almost this holistic, um, like a farm as an organism, which is a biodynamic concept, but I don't mean to spout biodynamic uh, language or lingo. I want to, I'm trying to get to this thing without saying it, like more of a, well, I'll just say like, seeing this as a community of life that you are participating in rather than, there's a field that you are turning into, a grape mine or whatever it is, that sort of conventional idea that, you're almost seeing the land through a spreadsheet versus walking into the land and becoming part of it and understanding how it's working, all of its systems together kind of idea. That, I mean, to me, that I'm speaking for my own personal thing, is like when I finally got to that point. I mean, and this is why I'm so grateful to wine, because it led me to that point. It's, there's like the magic comes back, like you start to tap into like a whole other side of participating in life that just has a whole different quality to it. I don't know. So I'm asking you, is that what you found in biodynamics? Is that the perspectives that were there, and how would you put that in your own words if it's not, or even if it is?
Yeah, I'd like to just step beyond biodynamics.
Yeah.
and just think of, as you said, it's that systems approach. And the system is so complex. And
Yeah.
with winemaking and grape growing, gosh, it's incredibly complex. It's like this web of all this interconnectedness that every little decision means something for something else.
Right.
And you have to be all encompassing, or at least you have to grasp the surface of geology and biology. And oh my gosh, it's just so much that, uh, in a way, it's incredibly stimulating. And
Yeah.
so for me, a lot of my scientific background lives in that element of observation. I
Mm.
love to watch and to see and to either act or not act on my observations.
Mm.
And I think so much of that in my life is thinking of the system as a whole, but never being able to grasp it completely. I
Mm-hmm.
know that there are some actions that I may make that have large sort of implications to the ecology or the environment of my vineyard. For example, the use of herbicides or the use of cultivation, and and yet, I don't claim to know what herbicide use or cultivation use does to the ecology of vole habitat, for example. I know that science suggests that through actions like sanitation and chemical suppression and other things, you can manipulate your voles, but does that create the balance that you need?
Mm.
And with the systems approach, you uh, finding balance is the greatest chaos that you might ever try to achieve, because there is never balance.
Mm.
And so there's, to me, I love just this element of standing back and watching. And with biodynamics, uh, it too is like a giant black box to me, just like that system approach is a giant black box to me. I am incredibly diverse in the ways that I like to tackle my questions. I love remote sensing. I love GIS. Google Earth is my friend. You can cut out, strike out that Google part. But like really, like I can look at a site. I can drill down through 10 different layers to understand what a site could give to me just without even setting foot on it. But then setting foot on a site and being present and just respecting the place and understanding that there is a relationship between every organism in that place, and how one small action can just sort of upset that balance. So with biodynamics, again, it's like there's am I creating change that through, let's just say, for example, in my application of biodynamics with my farming, I use 500, which is horn manure, and 501, which is horn silica. I
Mm-hmm.
use them sort of in tandem twice a year. And then I also use biodynamic compost. And the, everything that I do, I can't see the effects of what that biodynamic compost is doing in the system, because I'm not creating a control right next door that is going to show me the opposite or the effect of
Right.
what that biodynamics is. And
Right.
so I just have to believe that in through my monitoring and measurement and recognizing these patterns that happen, that allows me to sort of guide my intervention if I choose to intervene.
Yeah, I've lots of thoughts about what you just said. I mean, and lots of questions. I the idea of balance. Yeah, I couldn't agree more that it's sort of it's you know it seems like it's a human concept. I mean, it seems like the world swings. It swings, and what we call balance is actually this sort of dynamic position that we take a snapshot of where we're happy with everything, right? Like it's like great, everything is perfect the way we want it,
Yeah.
and that's what we call balance. But it's really just your that's like a moment in time on something that swings sometimes to pretty far extremes from a human perspective. If you take the big perspective, and yeah, it's I don't know. I do think it's funny. I think it's sort of like a utopian ideal in some ways. But I almost think that we're actually talking about something else when we talk about balance as something to strive for.
Yeah. One of my favorite podcasts of recent is Dr. Danielle and the conversation about voles,
Oh, great.
and really just how balance in an ecosystem is observed very uh, temporally. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a snapshot in time because the vole population may grow to a point that they reach carrying capacity, and then boom, predators come in, disease comes in, et cetera. It's this ebb and flow, this very cyclical
Right.
nature of everything.
Yeah.
And sometimes they match up and create just this pure bliss, but sometimes they really are antagonists.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the voles, I mean, definitely were my teachers in this as well. That this idea of balance, definitely they were my biggest teachers for sure. But now I'm like beginning to see, our human experience as part as it's very hard not to see us as voles going through a population explosion and reaching carrying capacity and seeing what that looks like on the world, in the same way that I saw this bowl, what what I've referred to as a plague in a vineyard. Very similar experience. Um, I, the other thing I wonder. So I don't. I take it you're not Demeter certified in any of your vineyards, or are you?
No, no, and I don't intend to be.
Okay.
I'm pragmatic in such a way that would exclude me or preclude me from doing that sort of thing because,
Yeah. Explain what that means to you.
well, you don't know this, but I am uh, trying to do a lot of different things with my farming philosophies, and so much of it is really experimentation.
Hmm.
And with the hybrids, for example, I planted back in 2019. They're going into their seventh or eighth leaf now, and they're acting like 2 or 3 year olds. Um, but over the first 5 years, I didn't spray them at all, and it was an experience because I was able to identify where their Achilles heels are, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I grow Regent, I grow Chamberson, and I grow Chardonnay, and then a hodgepodge of other hybrid varieties.
Okay.
And Regent, for example, from the nurseries, was marketed as the no spray red. And if you read that and you're a grower and you're like, oh man, I just found the holy grail of grape growing, um, you could believe that to a degree until you actually try it. And so what it turns out is that of course Regent is susceptible to black rot.
Right.
Um, it is still able to carry roughly 50% of its crop in the absence of a black rot infection. So with respect to powdery mildew, non-existent. Downy mildew, it gets it, but it doesn't proliferate and it doesn't sort of spread to the fruit. Um, and so I didn't know that, but I found that out. I could have just taken the really standard conventional approach and just sprayed it like vinifera. Um, Chardonnay, similarly in my climate, everybody's climate is going to be different. Everybody's place and site is going to be different. But Chardonnay is also pretty bomb-proof, except for black rot. And
Yep.
then Chamberson, same thing, black rot. They're all needing some sort of element of control for black rot.
Right.
And so for me, that I wouldn't have known that, and I wouldn't have known how resilient they were against downy mildew or powdery or alternaria or any of those different diseases without just observation. And So again, that's kind of my approach to all of this, is that I need to be able to observe and then act in the presence of that. And so there isn't really a good sort of mechanism of control for black rot other than really good cultural control.
Hmm.
And that's sanitation, that's good handwork within the vineyard. You can definitely remove lesions on leaves and stuff like that. But we're still kind of stuck in this conundrum of either accepting loss of fruit or using some sort of product to protect against, or material to protect against that infection.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to keep myself from that sort of control or endpoint of, well, I want to see this fruit make it to harvest so I can test its chemical parameters and even test it for winemaking.
Yeah.
And so I need that practical backdrop. If I don't have it, then I'm constantly losing my ass, which is already true, but like then it just becomes untenable
Right.
and
Yeah.
depressing.
And so, what products control do you use for control of black rot?
So I come from a very conventional sort of backdrop of vineyard management, and so sterile inhibitors tend to work pretty well, and yet we're seeing some resistance against them for things like powdery mildew. Um, and if there's, for example, the brand name is called Rivastapa. The actual active ingredient escapes me at the moment, but that is like this broad spectrum, systemic, covers all diseases that are problematic to you, and is effective for a 3-week period. And if you think about um, well, your most critical period for disease infection is sort of from bloom and 3 to 4 weeks post bloom. Um, I started out using just a single application of the systemic at bloom and finding that my black rot almost disappeared overnight.
Yeah.
And then powdery mildew, downy mildew, I didn't see them. And
Right.
so a single application of a systemic around bloom in hybrids in Virginia in this climate that is just really challenging to grow in was enough.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so after that, I pulled back because I needed to see how much I could pull back. And I started with just copper, like Cooperfix, which is an organic OMRI approved material, but it's copper is another broad spectrum fungicide, but it's not as effective against black rot. And
Yeah.
so I did one application over 2 successive years of just copper at bloom. And what I found was copper does great against powdery and downy. Maybe not so much powdery, but I don't have much powdery in
Right.
my vineyard environment to begin with. But great against downy and marginal against black rot.
Yeah.
And so now I am almost 4 years into this sort of fruiting discovery in my hybrids, that this year I plan to use Quava, which is an insecticidal, I mean, a soap based copper. Um, and it's OMRI approved. I'm planning on using it twice over from bloom until 3 to 4 weeks post bloom to cover that critical period
Yeah.
to see if that's capable of handling the disease load. Ultimately, I don't know, and everything that I keep doing is just experimentation and observation.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the other nice thing about Quava is very low sulfur. It's like a much lower sulfur salt. I mean, sorry, much very low copper content. Like it's a, it's almost, well, it's not, it's not homeopathic, but it's a, it's a fraction of a lot of other products that are copper products, which is kind of a nice, if it's not relying heavily on the copper. I'll put it in that sense.
Yeah,
Um,
I am trying to sort of use like the EU standards of like no more than 3 pounds of copper per acre as sort of a basis for everything that I do. And
Yeah.
so if um, a lot of the copper products, their rates are around 2 pounds per acre. It ranges from there to 4 in some cases. And so
For a
a
single
lot of,
spray, you mean?
yeah, per single
Wow.
spray. And
Wow.
so just one application just wipes out your copper allowance if you're
Yeah,
adhering to other standards.
exactly. Right.
And
Yeah.
so Cueva really does sort of help achieve that sort of it really dilutes the copper, but the copper is also more accessible.
Yeah.
And I I love that. I love that I have this tool that's available to me. I don't love that it's so expensive. And
Mhm.
for a lot of what I'm doing, uh, as I mentioned, I shoot myself in the foot a lot of different ways, but I'm also trying to remove inputs in very dramatic ways. And so, whether that's a tractor pass, an herbicide pass, or a pass for spraying fungicides, if I can make up for pulling out in some ways, I can then afford to spend a little bit more in other ways.
Right. Right. Well, you mentioned herbicides. What do you do with them? How have they
Um,
changed in your journey?
Yeah, so I haven't used herbicides for our farming, at least on the farm, for now 7 years.
Okay.
And Ben and I, very early on in our thinking, we're like, we have to do everything we can to help these grapevines survive. It turns out that grapevines are incredibly resilient despite all the bad things you could do to them. And we
They're
we
kind of
we
like
found that out.
weeds.
Yeah, they do, and in some instances,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so we uh, we thought about how sort of there's this element of carbon sequestration through all the things that we do, whether it's a, a permanent crop like a perennial crop like grapevines that store carbon in their wood or store carbon beneath the soil surface. There's that same element with our vineyard floor. Our vineyard floor is wild. It was once just a cattle pasture. We didn't
Mhm.
do anything to manipulate our vineyard floor once we planted it. And
Yeah.
so ever since, it's become sort of this uh, landscape that has some sort of human touch to it. And that human
Yeah.
touch is both a tractor passing through it. We will mow it once a year to cut up our trimmings in the vineyard.
Mhm.
But then after that, we've adapted this technique of scything under vine. And so this is one of Ben's projects. We've been doing it for about 5 years now. And just from a weed control perspective, a weed is something that is out of place in your perspective, like where
Right.
it's very subjective, you know.
Yeah.
And so for us, weeds are things that grow into the fruit zone. So we grow VSP. Our fruiting wire is about 30 inches off the ground,
Okay.
and that means that these are species that are growing taller than 3 feet. And so we're particularly keen on things like broadleaves, like morning glory, and
Mhm.
um, um, I call it colt's foot, and other things.
You've
But go ahead.
I you have colt's foot that's growing more than 30
Well,
inches?
no, but
Oh,
it grows such huge
broad leaves. Yeah.
broad leaves that can
Got it.
just a little outcompete in a way. But what we
Gotcha.
found is that the only species that we're really actually trying to control for are thistle. Sometimes
Got
chicory.
it.
Chicory will grow 6 feet tall, but it's so spindly and its leaves are so
Right.
thin, like willow, that allows airflow and doesn't block sunlight.
Right. Right.
Um, but then that also allows us to cut back the grasses that are a little tall underneath, but also be very selective about the flowering species. And so any flowering species that we see under vine, even though it's tall and it may grow into the fruit zone, we allow it to be. Um, and that's with the exception of thistles. And Ben will make a pass on a per acre basis. It'll take him about 6 hours. So if you think about what that means, relative to applying an herbicide, if you use those expensive ones, whatever pre-emergent, let's just give it a $25 to $50 an acre cost, plus the cost of whatever machinery, whether it's backpack as a person or you start to mechanize. And that's 6 hours an acre, 2 passes a year becomes really cost competitive. And the problem is that the vines that we planted in that space are not capable of competing in that ecological sort of element. That we planted things like 10114 rootstock,
Mm-hmm.
Riparian rootstock, 3309,
Mm-hmm.
in an area now that has 4 or 5 foot tall foliage growing within and around it at some parts during the year. So we
Right.
don't mow our vineyard except for to trim our clippings. Then we get a hayfield by the middle of June.
Right.
I'm looking out into my hybrids right now, and the tips of my hay are above my fruiting wire. And
Yeah.
um, there's there's so much competition under vine and within row, that we have incredibly reduced yields, and we also sometimes don't have to hedge. And so we're finding there are all these sort of silver linings to not doing anything.
Yeah.
Like the competition reduces the vigor of the vines. In some cases, there's a mismatch where there's too much rock content in the soil, or the soil's too dry, doesn't have enough hydraulic conductivity. All that sort of stuff we can deal with,
Mm.
but we wouldn't have known until we tried it, and nobody was out there being sort of a colleague of ours that we could sort of lean on and ask, hey, what's going to happen when we allow our vineyard to turn into a hayfield? And they're like hitting us over the head because that's stupid. But nobody's done that, and so
Yeah.
we're paving our own grounds to understand what our vineyards are capable of. And ultimately, what we've discerned is that the traditional rootstocks that have been recommended for Virginia viticulture don't suit the way that we grow. And so now we are doing things that people, again, would hit us over the head for, but we're planting rootstocks like 1103 Paulson.
Yeah.
And
That's funny.
these are rootstocks that have incredible vigor, but they're also drought resistant.
Right.
And they hopefully are able to cut it in the way that we are growing our grapes.
Well, if you're planting quite a few hybrids that you might grow there on the East Coast, you wouldn't even need rootstock, would you?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. And through my observation matters mindset, with my hybrid vineyard, I planted Chardonnay and Chambourcin on the family of rootstocks, Unroot, Riparia, 10114, and 3309.
Mm-hmm.
And under this environment of no cultivation, no mowing, no herbicide, what I use is a roller crimper. But
Okay.
beside the point, unrooted Riparia 10114, they really just cannot cut it in this sort of extensive competition environment.
Wow. Okay.
So that
Okay.
uh, if you come visit my farm, you look at my 8-year-old, 9-year-old hybrid vines, and hybrids are supposed to be more vigorous, right? Um,
Yeah.
they look like they're a second-year conventional vineyard vine.
Well,
They're so small.
I mean, this probably gets into that, like this idea that, I think, people think there are two classes, like vinifera and hybrids, and you can talk about, because you can talk about vinifera sort of generally, like we know the characteristics of vinifera as a group, and then people just apply that to hybrids, like, oh, and then the alternative is hybrids. But it's like, well, hybrids are like an infinite potential class. So, it really depends. We have to start talking about like what percentage of what species are in the specific varieties that you're growing. And yeah, I mean, like, cause I'm growing, like if you were growing Cayuga White there, I bet you would be fine on own rooted, and maybe the Frontenacs as well. There's certain certain vines like that are, I think, incredibly vigorous hybrids that, like, even in my vineyard here that I'm doing, I mean, my little wine forest, which I'm doing very similar thing to what you're doing. Like I'll mow once a year. I'm doing nothing to the soil other than adding a little compost when I plant, you know. And and some of the vines are obviously struggling. You know, they're not that, you know, they didn't grow very much last year, but a couple varieties like Cayuga and Frontenacs are just like nuts. You know, like they're
Yeah.
even with, you know, total neglect, they're just freaking out. You know, they're happy. It You know, there's something else I wanted to say, like this a perspective. I mean, there's a little bit of a, I mean, I always caveat these discussions like, hey, you know, I have this luxury of like this thing that I'm doing here. I don't want to call it experimental because I think it's, but it is, you know, I mean, it's like nobody's doing it, and or you know, it hasn't been done in a long time, or very few people are doing it on Earth right now, and so I, what am I trying to say? Like, the reason I'm hesitant to say experimental is because, yeah, I guess what I'm saying is like I'm not relying on it to provide an income for me. At the same time, like, you know, wine. This is why I'm like caveating my caveat, which is like in some ways, like, yes, wine for some people is their source of survival, and that's totally. I mean, support that and hope that for people, you know. But at the same time, like, it is a thing that isn't necessary for survival in the sense of like, you know, as a foodstuff. Now it could be, you know, I mean, like there are calories and nutrients that you can get, you know, will get you through a winter. But I guess my point is giving wine, if you can, it's the one thing where it's like maybe it's good to have these sort of deeper thoughts and more, sort of, how do I put it, like to ask bigger questions of the agriculture that you're doing, because you know you have that, it is a thing that, like, the world doesn't rely on wine to provide its sustenance, at least not its physical sustenance. Maybe it's, you know, emotional, spiritual sustenance, some people.
Hmm.
So anyway, I say all that as a huge caveat, and apologies for taking the time to set that up, but the perspective that I've started to take is to see everything as a cover crop. So like whether it's a vine I plant or a tree I plant, or whether I'm scattering pollination seeds, you know, just to hope that they sprout, you know, that the voles and the birds don't eat them all before some of them sprout, or it's bushes, berry bushes, or, you know, whether I'm planting comfrey or anything like that around the vines, it's and trees, it's all cover crops. And then it's like, but what are they cover crops for? Like, what are you cultivating? And that's where the bigger perspective comes in. It's like you're cultivating the health of the entire system as the end goal versus a crop as the end goal, like a fruit crop as an end goal. The fruit crop and its abundance and health is almost a byproduct of what you're actually farming, if you start thinking of the vine as one of your cover crops. And it also changes the way I've thought about, you know, just the amount of time and the amount of resources that I want to give it, where it's like so many of us come in to set up a vineyard, and it's like so many resources are expended to make sure that this one type of plant does really well really quickly in this system, because your crop is the grape. And when your crop becomes something bigger than grapes, like, you can take the time. You can say, like, you know, I don't have to put all of this energy and resources into the planting and establishing of this thing, because they are doing the establishing by growing. You know, they're creating the the soil health. They are helping, you know, they're one of the cover crops that helps produce an ecosystem that's thriving. It's not. I'm not creating a thriving ecosystem for them. They are part of the process of creating the thriving ecosystem. Anyway, I've been taking that perspective here at the farm, but it is like I was saying, it slows things down a little bit, because I could get my grapes growing a lot faster with, you know, if I did a deep rip and tilled the soil and put in a bunch of, you know, compost and mulch everything really well around the vines and trees, like everything would probably take off really well. And I say all this to just to apply it to what you're doing too, which is like, sometimes I like that idea that it's okay, to take a little time. You're maybe you're just farming something bigger than just the grapes. So, and you mentioned willow. I was just out planting willows with my vines yesterday.
Yeah.
What made you mention willow?
Well, through the conversations that you've had
Oh
time and
yeah,
time before, and then also I've done that same thing. I've stuck some stakes in the ground in my vineyard. Um, I am very much in tune with that philosophy of everything as a cover crop.
yeah,
Um, it, we're it depends on what your mindset is. Like if your mindset is productivity, um,
right,
there may be an element where it's complementary to like the abundance of your ecology, but very often it's like the antagonist to your ecology. And so I taking that systems approach again,
what
looking
is antagonist to that, to the ecology?
well, the antagonist to ecology, if you're looking for productivity,
Oh,
well,
right,
then
right. Yeah,
you
it's like
should
you're
you should use
fighting.
herbicide. You
Right, right.
should
Yeah.
you should cultivate. You
Yeah.
should do all these things
Yeah,
that
it puts you in a position of conflict with your community because they're thwarting that end of productivity.
yeah, and yet that conversation of access, like I have incredible access. I'm very, very fortunate to have access to a farming, like a property that is free and clear of, I don't know, debt, for example,
Right.
and I can afford to take some risks. But at the same time, these risks are incredibly expensive,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so why am I doing it, and why am I losing money rather than gaining money? And it's something that I'll probably be asking myself for time immemorial, but also to acknowledge that I'm gaining something that's intangible, and I have to believe in the stewardship of the farm and
Yeah.
like the greater ecology, rather than just this vineyard is a success.
I mean,
Um,
I love this. I mean, I really appreciate that because you're right. Like, I don't want this to sound like privilege talking, which is why I gave all those caveats because just trying to talk around that a little bit. But you just brought up a couple other things, the cost, and what I'm saying in a sense is like I'm toying with the idea of so little inputs that the cost is really just time. Like I'm literally not using anything purchased to establish a vineyard. I'm not, I'm literally planting by hand. And I mean, I have to drive around? I have to have like vine cutting shipped here. So of course there are fossil fuels involved in like getting some of these species onto the farm. Um, but I'm using hand tools and just human energy to be able to establish this. And so I'm toying with this idea of time as the only cost, and can that actually balance out all of the input costs that you might try to justify by saying there's an economic imperative, if you don't have the privilege of like a debt-free piece of land, for example.
yeah,
The other thing I'm toying with is establishing an infrastructure, a farm infrastructure that isn't reliant for its operation and health on fossil fuels. Not just like, oh, fossil fuels are bad, but the idea that maybe fossil fuels are going to become so expensive and so rare, if not specifically in our lifetime, but it's looking like maybe, but pretty soon, that I don't, I'm thinking like of a farm that is a farm 100 years from now, like
yeah,
a farm infrastructure that can survive into a future that is a post fossil fuel future. And what does that look like, and how does that operate? And so the lower the input, if you can afford the time, it gives you that ability to establish an infrastructure that maybe transcends your own lifetime and the current way of farming that relies on cheap fossil fuels. So those are my only other two caveats to that whole thing. But I totally agree. I don't want to sound like privileged speaking.
Yeah, me neither. And I also I had so many mentors along the way that I want to serve that same purpose for others as well. And
Yeah.
one of the elements of Commonwealth Crush is that uh, we are kind of opening the minds to new possibilities. And so, for example, muscadine. Muscadine grapes, they grow in Virginia,
Yeah.
mostly in the south side of Virginia because of heat specifically. Um, and yet, they aren't part of our wine culture. And they've always been part of the southern wine culture. And
Right.
Virginia kind of prides itself as being both southern and northern in its own right.
Yeah.
But it's also like this ambiguity as well. We have folks who grew up out of their grandparents' cellars, who would either make homemade brandy or wine or cider, etc. And these were from our backyard varieties. These weren't from these prestigious Chardonnay or Cabernet Franc and stuff like that. And very often, too, these wines were made to be sweet or left with a lot of residual sugar.
Yeah.
And so we have muscadines now sort of re entering this conversation in Virginia as far as winemaking goes, in a commercial sense that these are grapes that, if they can make it in our climate, we can grow with no input
Right.
except for our own.
Right.
And uh, if I don't want to use any sort of religious euphemisms, but the holy grail of grapes, uh, like we, I need to discover that variety. I haven't discovered those varieties that are best suited to my farm yet. Just like we spent 10 years trying to understand what were the best vinifera for this
Yeah.
site, now we're spending the next decade to understand what the best hybrids are for the site. And the problem is like so much of my research that I did with Great Berry Moth 20 years ago, the climate has changed. Like
Right.
I was doing a lot of predictive modeling based on the insect's biology. Well, the climate's changed, and now the biology of the insect has changed, and that's true about our grapevines and what their climatic abilities are. And so we're in this incredible period of change, and we have to go back to the drawing board to understand what's possible. And it may not be just grapevines. It's this eschewing this concept of monoculture.
Yeah.
Of course, in our vineyards, like if we have one type of fescue and then one type of grapevine, then yeah, it's basically a monoculture with another species. But in our vineyard environments, if you have this wild vineyard floor, you have 50 to 100 different plant species in one place, then you have that diversity of animals, invertebrates, everything, microorganisms. They they come or they're able to thrive if they have that ecological niche to work within.
Yeah.
And so in this no input world, we need varieties that are suited to place and are able to withstand and be resilient to all the pressures. And then also, as humans, at least from my perspective, is that we have to just be willing to accept some losses and not
Yeah.
have this element of I have to extract all productivity out of this land that's possible.
Mm.
Um,
That's a really
and you
important
know,
idea. Yeah.
I the the loss, like in the winery, for example, we lose a lot of wine or liquid to evaporation, um, and in the
The
vineyard
angel
as
share,
well.
right?
Yeah, yeah, and it's applicable across so many parts of
Yeah.
our lives,
Yeah.
and through the vineyard, gosh, I share so much of my fruit with the deer every year. And the problem is that I don't then get to harvest that deer for myself. Some other person gets to benefit from all of my good fruit.
Right, right.
And and so I all of these challenges we can overcome with a little bit of ingenuity and without much input. But at the same time, when we have these prophylactic measures that just make it easy for us to sit back and not worry, then it's obvious why we choose that path.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I have a total understanding from doing, for any amount of farming, I think you quickly realize, oh, this is really hard, like no, even if you're doing the most basic thing that is whatever, you're like, wow, people actually do this for a living every day, like and when you do that yourself for a year or a season or whatever, it becomes really apparent why we want the path of least resistance, because there's so much resistance without adding more to unnecessary to yourself. you know
Yeah,
you you uh you brought up so many good things there, like going back now. Oh, muscadines. I'll just jump right
yeah,
into muscadines. So love muscadines. It's funny, so many of the things that you've brought up are like things that I talk about in my book that's coming out this fall. And I actually have a little special section to muscadines, because it's sort of like, in a really special way, it's like North America's vinifera, in the sense that it's like an uncrossed species that has now like over 150 named varieties. It's indigenous to here. It's like our native, like, flavors of grape. It's one of the few grapes that has the flavors of labrusca. Those two grapes kind of like represent, I think, our North American uniqueness in terms of flavor. Not that they're the only thing. We have lots of other species of grapes, but it's such a fun grape. It's also what you made me think of. And now what I tell people to try to describe it, I'm like, harvesting it is more like harvesting blueberries, because it doesn't grow in bunches. It grows as individual, grape berries. There aren't clusters. There's like, it's like berry picking instead of cluster picking. It's also resistant to almost everything, but it's resistant to Pierce's disease. And do you have pressure from Pierce's disease on your other varieties there? Because it seems like Virginia would be right at the doorstep of the range for Pierce's disease,
yeah,
if it's not.
absolutely. Yeah, we
So it's
are.
something you're starting
And
to think about.
well, it is, and it isn't. So
Okay.
southeast side of Virginia, incredibly at risk to Pierce's disease, and this is really talking about heat units,
Right.
um, both within season and over winter.
Right.
The bacterium, it's not able to withstand temperatures under 4 degrees Fahrenheit
Right.
for too long.
Right.
And so if you get so many winter days or nights that go below that 4 degree threshold, then your population dynamics get knocked back quite dramatically. And so we almost always achieve that here in the Shenandoah Valley. But once you get over the Blue Ridge Mountains into the Piedmont and east towards the Tidewater, you don't get that. And
Right.
and so those regions are at risk to Pierce's disease. And so when we have some of those warm winters in consecutive fashion, you do start seeing Pierce's disease cropping up in vineyards that you didn't see it before. But the
Yeah.
thing about Pierce's too is that it's unmistakable once you start seeing its symptoms.
Right.
The match sticking of the petioles, for example, some
Mm-hmm.
of the sort of chlorotic or necrotic lesions on leaves and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But just it's not changing my mindset yet, but it sure does put people on their toes in those susceptible regions. And
Yeah.
so it kind of necessitates those things like undervine cover control, using the
Right.
herbicide and trying to
Right.
prevent those vectors from moving into your vineyard. So
Right.
you're doing a lot of sanitation measures on the borders of your vineyard.
And
It's
by
it
sanitation, you mean like eliminating insect
Yeah,
habitat, like
yeah,
either
really.
through, basically through herbicides, right?
Yeah, and you're really just trying to keep those sharpshooters, for example, from moving from like riparian buffer areas into your vineyard. And
Right.
so it's about location, but also um, trying to just stop that flow. And you're reducing habitat, flowering species, for example. Any flowering species in your vineyard is a beacon of attraction to a sharpshooter.
Yeah.
And that's true about a lot of different species. But then, why should I care about Pierce's disease when I have other things to care about, Adam? Uh, uh, but yeah, that's the thing.
Climate
It's like
change? or,
no. How about lanternfly, for example?
right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, yes, exactly.
There's a new species on our doorstep every couple of years, and a lot of these invasive species they'll burn through our ecosystems. They'll reach their carrying capacity and then they'll crash. And I've seen that quite often with a lot of these different invasives. I'm kind of thinking that, I mean, just based on our anecdotal evidence and observations with lanternfly in Pennsylvania and now moving south, they do have a period of destruction and then they wane. And so for Virginia, we are in the period of destruction. And thinking about like why we do this, why does one want to grow grapes or make a living out of doing this? It's like
or attempt
uh,
to. Yeah.
yeah, it's incredibly stressful to think about right now
Mm.
because of the dynamics at play. And if I don't use an insecticide against this lanternfly, then I have a great chance of diminishing my potential crop for the next season. And if I don't control the insect for 2 years in a row, I have a great chance of losing those grapevines to mortality.
Mm.
And there are some organic materials. They're incredibly expensive, those pyrethrins and whatnot, but um, it's a crapshoot. We have to deal with these problems as they arise, and sometimes it's creativity, but sometimes it's that very uh, intensive, conventional approach that saves your butt. And that's why I have to be pragmatic about my growing, that I'm not going to be Demeter certified. Not to say that I won't ever be, um, but at the same time, I know the risks and everything that I'm up against, and I have to be resilient.
Yeah. No, thanks. I wanted to ask you more about that. So I think you dug into it. Um, yeah. And so right now, spotted lanternfly is pretty bad in Virginia in terms of its the extent of the damage that you guys are seeing.
Yeah, it's moving. So last season was the first season that Northern Virginia saw sort of extensive impacts both on ripening kinetics, but also sort of fruit quality, because a lot of the issues with the insect is the sooty mold that develops from their excrement. And
Um,
so when city mold develops on leaves, that's one thing, but when it develops on the fruit, it doesn't make the skins crack or anything of that nature. But just due to the abundance of the insect on the vine, it reduces the fitness of the vine. The vine is not able to ripen the fruit. So not only does the fruit look bad due to the sooty mold, but it's also not hitting those ripening parameters that we need. And so we saw a lot of that with Commonwealth Crush. We source fruit from all over the state. And so we started to see some of that city mold coming through our doors. And in some cases, we just sorted out that city mold. In some cases, we threw it into the vat. Some of the early research is suggesting that that city mold might have a carry on sort of flavor effect, but we don't really know for sure. Um, and we're here in our family farm in the central part of the Shenandoah Valley. I've been seeing lanternfly come for 5 years now,
yeah.
but it didn't really come until last year. And then last year was when it was like a plume, a cloud of
Oh
insects in
boy.
my vineyard hitting me in
Wow.
the face in every direction. And
Sheesh.
I didn't do anything to control it.
Okay.
And what I've seen, especially in the areas that are impacted the greatest, because a lot of insects are invaders, they're invading from an outside source. Our vineyards are like islands, island
Right.
parties and destinations that they want to come to.
Right.
And uh, it's these edges that were impacted the most, and the vigor of the vines is dramatically reduced. The uh, um, bud mortality is increased, and I'm seeing the very real lasting impacts of just one significant season of pressure from lanternfly.
Wow.
So that tells me I need to do something about it this fall. A
Yep.
lot of growers in Virginia, due to whether it's misinformation or again that sort of prophylactic "this makes me feel better" experience, are treating their lanternflies now, and they're attacking nymphs. And a lot of the scientific research suggests that there's little or to minimal impact from nymphal feeding. And so we're
Yeah.
going out and we're using these broad spectrum insecticides to not only uh, kill all the lanternfly nymphs, but also everything else.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's careless. And this is where like I might put my foot in my mouth, but like a lot of activities and conventional farming mindset is full of carelessness. It
Mm.
is disregard, and and the folks who are using these broad spectrum insecticides don't realize that they're now going to have secondary pest flare ups,
Right.
whether it's mites or the fact that they just nuked all their natural predators in the vineyard environment too. And
Yeah.
it turns out 2 weeks later, either those nymphs found a way to migrate into the vineyard or they never got killed in the first place and they got to do it all over again.
Right.
And so it's this uh, just I can't get into that mindset of having to control everything. Um,
Yeah.
but I can get into the mindset of controlling things at the appropriate time.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, how are they feeding? Are they sap suckers? What are they? Are they doing like
Yes,
they're
lanternflies are like what we call true bugs. True bugs being the hemiptera, any of the there's the hemiptera are very broad and diverse. It includes folks like the aphids, and the wheel bugs and the lanternflies and the stink bugs. Very diverse. A lot of them are plant feeders, but not all of them. And some are predatory. But these specifically are they're attacking for the nutrition within the stem and within the plant juices. I believe with a lot of the lanternfly sort of nymphal feeding that you see on the shoots right now, you might see a little bit of a vascular collapse that's very localized.
okay?
And with the mature adults feeding on the vines, again, at great numbers, you do see sort of that they're taking those nutrients out of the vine and either preventing the berries from being able to ripen or reducing the vine's fitness
Right.
for success. And
They're not. Are they piercing and sucking? Are they like munching like a Japanese beetle? Like are they like a
oh yeah,
sharpshooter?
they're definitely piercing, sucking,
Okay. Got it.
and they're going straight into the vascular tissues of the
Got it.
grapevine. They have these mouth parts that are very flexible, and it's like a needle, but it's a flexible needle. And all plants have small micro cracks,
Yeah.
and grapevines are no exception. And they're able to find the smallest little cracks and then tap into that reservoir.
Got it. Okay. There are cracks in everything. I think that's a line from a poem. That's how the light gets in, I think is how it ends.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, well, tell us about Commonwealth Crush. And I mean, when I just go and see what's going on there, it looks like such a fun group of people. You know, and can you talk about what you wanted to do when you set that up? And I mean, talk about both of your projects, that and your other project, your estate project.
Yeah, Commonwealth Crush is a dream come true for sure. It was a sort of an idea that Ben and I sort of co-created 10, 15 years ago because we were small producers and we realized that growing grapes is such a hurdle economically, let alone then building a winery, having the skill set or the knowledge set to then make that wine, to then bottle it, sell it, etc. Um, there's no one resource in the state, and there's really not a lot of resources in the state that is allowing that access.
Mm.
Um, and so, for example, when he and I started in the Virginia wine industry, there were custom crush facilities in Virginia, but very often those custom crush facilities were doing all of the work and just sort of applying the client's sort of aesthetics or mentality or expectations to the product. But in a way, it was still one creator and creating 10s or 20 different brands at once.
Mm.
But for us, with our state project, which we call Midland, um, it's on our family farm. We have a farm. We have vineyards. We put up a lot of time and resources to build those vineyards, but turns out that we don't have neither the time nor resources to build a winery. And a winery really, I mean, when it comes down to it, wine is pretty easy to make, and it's also pretty easy to mess up. And so when you have the ability to control your climate within your winemaking space and maintain cleanliness and all those other elements, that's great, but at such expense.
Right.
And for us, we had always sort of made our wine for Midland out of other cellars, out of the corners of other cellars, and we found often that there wasn't room for us. Whether somebody needed that tank, the main proprietor needed that tank or needed that storage space, etc. There had to be other folks just like us, and it turns out there were. And we knew about the other winemakers in the state that were trying to do something akin to us without all the resources. And so Commonwealth Crush was built as a platform to raise everybody up, not only as an incubator, but just to lower those barriers to entry to allow everyone sort of the same access. And it wasn't just about a place where you could get a wine brand made. It was a place where you could come in and make that wine brand yourself.
Mm.
And the challenge with Virginia is that we don't have that alternating proprietor, that licensing system that California has, that
Right. Right.
multiple brands can make in one space. But our workaround is what we call contract winemaking. So with Midland, for example, we contract to make our wine at Commonwealth Crush, and that includes from grape to bottle, and yet it allows us the control and access through every step of the process.
Right.
And Commonwealth Crush isn't just built around these maker producers. It's also built with that greater umbrella that we do have clients who need a little bit more hands-on work from us, a little bit more guidance as far as the winemaking goes, and we want to provide the resources that are needed across the board for any avenue of what you want to do. And so if that means that you just want to do a single SKU of a canned wine, we can do that. Uh, but if you want to be a 100-ton client for us, we love that too. But really, what this place was built for were clients between 10 to 40 tons, give or take, clients who are individuals who probably have their own vineyards or don't, have their own tasting room or don't. Um, but it's also just a place that we can collectively work on our products together. We can bounce our ideas off of each other. We can see firsthand how 100, 200 different wines are made and the outcomes of all those decisions within the winemaking. And that's what's cool about Custom Crush, just in general. But what's cool about Commonwealth Crush is that there's 10, 20 winemakers around that table too. And so we all come, whether it's winemakers who are individuals that are formally in marketing or sales, or individuals who come from agriculture, we all come from these various broad and diverse backgrounds that it informs a little bit of place, but it really builds into that human element of sharing and caring. And we love that about Commonwealth Crush. And this is truly just the beginning of what we're doing. We have an incredible group of clients, but at the same time, the flavors and tastes that are coming out of Commonwealth Crush are just kind of mind blowing and eye opening to me because I grew up again in this conventional mindset of wine, but also in conventional wine. And now we're this is the exact opposite of conventional wine. I wouldn't call it natural winemaking because everybody does things a little bit differently, and we're not really working with fruit that has that organic or biodynamic background to it.
Right.
But it's that community, that cohesiveness, stewarding all these different brands, um, and how freaking cool it is. We just love the community that is developing around it, within it, and outside of what we're doing. I mean, it's to me, it's kind of dull. But like, there's so much across both our our country, but across the world, that is inspirational. And Commonwealth Crush for me is that not only is it my day job, I can't afford to be a grape grower. I could never get paid to be a grape grower. But I have that day job, and that's what matters. But it also is an opportunity too for an outlet of fun and excitement. Because I go into work every day. For me, it's farming, but I go into work every day with that curiosity, that mindset of uh, challenge. That what am I going to do? What's my challenge today?
Yeah, I love that. You're also part of you and Ben are and maybe somebody else that's part of your group there. The Virginia grape breeding. Uh, I mean, if you want to talk about that, do you want to say what's going on with that and what your role is and what the objectives are?
Yeah. So we have such incredible community in Virginia within our agricultural community, but also grape growing, winemaking. For give or take the last 10 years, this program called the Winemakers Research Exchange. It's now currently being run by Joy Ting. This sort of citizen science, but it's like all of us as winemakers are scientists in our industry. And so this element of collaboration, that we're all working in pursuit of building excellence and quality and quantity across the board for everybody. So the Winemakers Research Exchange existed as an entity. And then we've got the Virginia Wine Board, which is a part of the Virginia wine industry that allows investment into various things, whether it's marketing or agricultural elements of building the Virginia wine industry. And so, in collaboration between the Winemakers Research Exchange, the Virginia Wine Board, and also USDA, a program was created to breed the next generation of hybrid grapes for Virginia. Um, so many of the hybrid grapes that we're working with today have histories that date back to the mid 20th century. And we're talking about creating varieties that are now suited to us as producers in Virginia. A lot of these hybrid varieties were established either for cold hardiness,
Hmm.
specifically a lot of those breeding programs in the Midwest, even in the Northeast, a lot of it's cold hardiness, and that's not our problem. Our
Right.
problem is disease pressure,
Right.
and so we need to find grape varieties that uh, are resilient against all of the pressures, but specifically the three main ones, which are black rot, powdery, and downy.
Yeah.
And
And black
so,
rot's the hard one. Yeah.
yeah, it is a hard one. Uh, if anyone wants to follow it, we can put some links into the program. But one of our main collaborators at the USDA is Dr. Surya Sakopa, and he is incredible. He has screened about 8,000 candidates, and then he's taken those screenings. He's made crosses. He's planted the crosses out into the field. He's made observations off those crosses, and that's all within just a couple of years.
Wow.
And so, in those candidates, there are several candidates that are black rot resistant. And
Fantastic.
so, if we can build those cell lines into future genetics of our grapevine breeding, that's just one step in the
Yeah, that's
process. We
fantastic.
also have to include the genetics for resistance against downy, powdery, etc., and
Right.
then create a variety that is capable of growing in our climate, is able to ripen within our climate, and then make good wine.
Right.
So the vision here with this grape breeding program is that in about 10 years from now, there will be a couple varieties that are best suited to our Virginia climate and that can grow throughout the state and are incredibly resilient against disease. And that's our emphasis. But we have so many other pressures as well, whether it's insects or weeds or the climate. But tackling a big element of what keeps us up at night is fungicides or funguses and
Yes.
disease,
Yeah.
and and that's what this as breeding program is about. I'm fortunate in that I get to be sort of uh, an onlooker and an advisor. Um, Yet I'm not the one doing the work. I'm simply observing and watching and seeing a transformation of what could be um, changing Virginia wine forever.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I would encourage everyone to just hear that thing that you said that, I want to like really highlight that idea that, again, hybrids are very diverse. Quite a few of the hybrids that we talk about now have been around for a while. And just, even though they have significantly more resistance and resilience of different kinds than vinifera, they this isn't like a once and done process. Like it's not about hybrids, it's about hybridizing. It's about hybridization. It's like an ongoing process of adaptation. This is like something new that I'm trying to emphasize in everything that I say with hybrids is like, what you got, the work that you're doing might be for, you as as these grapes come online, um, and for the next generation, but then we're going to keep breeding because there's the generation after that is going to need new grapes, and that's just something that's a different way of looking at wine, is something that it's an ongoing process of adaptation rather than like you're breeding the next pinot noir that we're going to keep around for 500 years. It's like, no, it's you know all of those fungi especially in Virginia will adapt and evolve and develop into new different varieties that will work around some of the defenses that we are developing into the grapes now. And so we just have to keep moving forward. So I just wanted to highlight that aspect of what you said. And if I'm not mistaken, you are, and and it's also like it's just want to highlight the point that you're doing this at a regional level. And this is something, I know the Finger Lakes has Cornell, and the Upper Midwest has Minnesota. But having this as a regional element wherever you are is such a smart idea too. To just like be thinking locally about adapting and breeding new varieties and having, ultimately, I mean, I'm sure that these varieties that you guys are breeding there will be basically bulletproof in California. So they might be a great thing to have in California too. But I really love the idea that, everywhere is going to start breeding its own varieties, and we'll start to have distinctive wines rather than like everybody's growing Chardonnay, like it'll be kind of a little more interesting wine culture in a few decades here where people start having signature varieties for their region once again. um, you, if I'm not mistaken, are you playing around with some vines and trees?
Yeah, and a lot of that certainly was inspired by conversations that you've had. But also, I've always looked at my farm as a place where I can constantly improve. So again, I didn't grow up around farming. I didn't come to farming until my 20s. And when I did, I knew that something wasn't right because our pastures were nibbled down to golf course, um, like like the greens. It was that short, and
Right.
it didn't come off very well with me. And so immediately upon not only moving to the farm, after our father and our grandparents passed away, we inherited this farm, and I became the caretaker and the steward.
Tim,
Um,
I'm sorry to break in here. I'm just going to
yeah,
pause for a second. I have to run and take care of something downstairs
yeah,
really quick. I'll be
go for it.
right back. Sorry about that.
Try to keep on going.
Hey, okay.
Hey,
About that. Thank you for your patience. All right, you
yeah,
were just talking about
yeah, the trees and vineyards and whatnot.
yeah.
Yeah. So with when I moved in onto our family farm, it was managed by other farmers, and I really wanted to take back the management of the farm myself, having no experience in agriculture other than grapes prior. I decided to buy a herd of cattle. And so I bought a herd of Galloway, both white Galloway and the black and white Oreo cows. And what I wanted to do was to take back sort of the ownership over stewarding the ecology of the land. I wanted my pastures to see some sort of rotational grazing element. I wanted to improve not only the fertility, but the productivity of my pastures, not just like as an output of hay or feed, but more so ecologically. And so, how do I do that? And you look across these landscapes, especially in a Shenandoah Valley. These are areas which have just used to be hills and mountains covered in forests and valleys that were kind of prairie-like. But now all of these landscapes are just kind of denuded of everything. And you might have a hedgerow, but you probably don't. Those fence lines are completely clear. There's not
Yeah.
a tree in sight. And so for me, so much of uh, my internal need is the need to be surrounded by green or life. And I just needed to bring that back to the farm. And so through rotational grazing with the cattle, and utilization of this cow calf herd as a means to bring back fertility to the farm. So through biodynamic preparations, I can utilize the manure from the cows to make my 500. And so that's like closing that loop here on the
Yeah.
farm. And then again, with um, a lot of these flowering species on the farm, it turns out that yarrow loves to grow on the farm. And
Oh,
so we
yeah.
have these just natural. resources, if you allow them to grow and you don't go out and just mow these spaces constantly, if you set aside some ecological reserves, then abundance starts to show up.
Yeah.
And so this kind of leads me into a program that I'm working with called Accelerating Appalachia.
Hmm.
Um, I am just getting enrolled in this program, but I'm so excited about it. And it's available. It's a resource open to um, farmers in like a 10 contiguous state area of the Southeast. And it's really about trying to elevate our carbon capture and also increase the productivity and sort of resilience of our soils. And so, what it's doing is it's paying me not to cultivate, and
Okay.
it's paying me not to use herbicide.
Okay.
So this is a federal program, and this is giving like it really does take a chunk out of my pocket when I don't use herbicide or I don't mow or cultivate. And so this is essentially a subsidy. But if oil and
Wait,
gas get subsidies, I will take a subsidy too.
well, let me ask you. So, when you say it takes a chunk out of your pocket when you don't cultivate or use herbicides, what do you mean? Do you mean it costs you something to not do those things?
Well, it's essentially a loss. I know that if I were to use herbicide or cultivate, that my vineyard would probably produce 100% more.
Got it. Okay.
So,
I
so
just want to
our
clarify. Yeah.
yeah, like our yields in our vinifera are less than 2 tons per acre. Hybrids around two or a little bit more.
Okay.
But I could have so much more productivity if I put more inputs into the system.
Right.
But for me, I I honestly I want to see this farm turn into the wild again, and I it's counter to probably my ancestors and all their work they did to like maintain it and keep the fences cleared and stuff like that. But now all of my fences are lined by 30-foot trees, and um, and I'm doing these absurd things like planting locusts out in the middle of my hay pasture uh, because like there's everything can work together.
Yeah.
And like if I create these hedgerows, I'm creating more abundance for both the predators but also the herbivores.
Yeah.
And but it's a refuge,
Yeah.
and I'm more intent on creating a refuge than I am on creating a desert.
Yeah. That's great. So this is where the trees and the vines come in.
Yes, and so part of the programming is paying up to like $1,000 per acre to plant trees, and it's for silvopasture and stuff like that.
Okay.
And
What's the
so
program called again?
it's called Accelerating Appalachia.
Accelerating Appalachia. Okay. Great to know.
So a lot of practices they've deemed increase organic matter or soil organic carbon or just inorganic carbon, but really just to say that um, you are you are giving resources to change farming activities dramatically. So that's we've got lots of farmers here in the Mid East who are using crop rotations because they have to. They have to plant corn, soybean, wheat, alfalfa. They have to do that because it breaks up the pest cycles.
Right.
Um, and I don't have to plant apple trees and pear trees in my vineyard environment, but I want to. uh,
Right.
because I can see that there's a virtue to that. Not only is it diversifying the potential commodities that I might be able to benefit from in a space, uh, but it also diversifies against various climatic indifferences that whether it's a hurricane or lots of rainfall, um, there's so many challenges against us that I need to be resilient on the farm with various means of um, productivity. And
Yeah.
so the cattle is one backdrop. The vineyard is can be counted on for the most part, except in years of extreme pest pressure or climatic pressure, which seems to be a lot more than it has been in the
Yeah.
past.
Yeah.
Um, And so with Accelerating Appalachia, I am rewilding our farm. And I haven't told Ben about this, so hopefully Ben doesn't balk on the matter, but I think Ben's in line.
You're
And in
secretly
reality,
rewilding your farm.
yes, it's allowing me to create like a 50-foot buffer around all fences.
Oh, wow.
So I then create this buffer corridor that becomes a natural wildlife corridor, um, but also is a place where I can plant uh, productive species, whether it's hardwoods like locusts, because locusts are some of the best trellis posts in the world,
Yeah. Yeah.
and fence posts for that matter.
Yep.
Um, but I can experiment, continue to experiment, and toy with these elements of um, exposing me to ways that I thought were impossible, or people told me were stupid. Like, don't plant trees next to your vineyard, let alone plant them in your vineyard.
Right.
Um, and that sort of brings up this other project that Ben and I are working on. It's our sort of our next vineyard project, and it's about a mile away from our farm. It's higher in elevation, so it has less frost pressure.
Hmm.
It was previously covered in 100% eastern red cedar,
Okay.
and so we cleared all of the red cedar to a degree. We left some ecological reserves and such, but um, then we took those cedars, we took off the tops and the root balls and preserved all the posts.
Hmm.
And so for 15 acres of what we hope to plant over the next 20 or 30 years, we have about 8,000 cedar posts. And so those
Amazing.
cedar posts are now closed loop on the land, serving as not only our deer fencing, but also trellis posts.
Right.
And so what we are bringing into the space now is wire and some anchors,
Right.
and grapevines.
Right.
And then we took all the tops, all the root balls, we mulched it up, spread it back onto the site. And
Amazing.
this is not what's typically done. Typically, things are just slashed and burned, buried, whatever,
Right.
and all of those would have been cheaper options. Instead, we took what we thought was the right approach, and then we uh, pretty much scuttled the possibility of planting any grapes on the site because we don't have any money left.
Well, yeah. Well, now let me ask you something since you're talking about planting more grapes. Are you considering something different besides VSP? Because it seems like that just is working against your purposes there. Like you could get up higher, you could get more airflow, you could get out of the some of those the understory crops.
Yes, yes. So I don't know when the shift or transition happened, but Ben and I basically said never vinifera
Okay.
ever again
Right.
at some point.
Yeah.
And Ben loves Sauvignon, and so he's
Oh,
and Petit
cool. Yeah.
Manseng. He might try to like sneak those in, but in reality, a lot of these peewee varieties, a lot of these new hybrids, for example, not many of them are upright growers.
Right.
And so they tend to actually suit really well to something like a high wire,
Yeah.
or like a married vine concept.
Right.
And two, for us, we're always experimenting. Ben and I, in our endless pursuits, we left a bunch of locusts out into our field, and so we're planting what we hope is a higher elevation muscadine variety. This was something that was referred to us by Chris Dinesha down in North Carolina, and so thankful for him as a colleague. But just to say that we're doing some married vine experimentation now, utilizing trees that are either endemic to place. We're not planting trees and planting grapevines together. Um, I, I, this is the beginning of our sort of experimentation, and there's not a lot of academic or resource material that tells you this is how you should do it.
Right.
But what I found is that trees tend to grow once they're going, they tend to outgrow a grapevine, and so you almost have to plant the grapevine first and then the tree.
Uh-huh.
But that's the thing. I don't know. For example, a black locust will grow 10 feet in a year.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so you're still going to have to manipulate these trees to accommodate a
Yeah.
grapevine.
Yeah.
And we've often considered the concept of lopping off the tops of these red cedars and just growing onto the red cedar. But red cedars aren't very deep rooting, so eventually that little stump will fall over.
Right.
Um, there's tons of opportunities. So what I do every year, I'm always replanting my vineyards, and I'm always reserving a couple vines and planting them with trees.
Yeah.
And I'm finding that there are some sort of marriages, so to speak, that are in my mindset could be really complementary to what we're doing. And so everybody's sort of ecological composition is going to be different. But for us, the two species that grow really, really well, more than you want them to, are mulberry
Uh-huh.
and locust.
Yeah.
We have our fair share of autumn olive and black walnuts and whatnot, but complementary species that tend to have that element that you can control their structure um, to complement holding a grapevine. And so, and we don't have to pay anything to plant them or propagate them or anything like that. So I'm very supportive of volunteer trees and planting grapevines with them.
So, I mean, you haven't found any partnerships that are particularly fruitful, uh, literally and figuratively? Just
I haven't
okay.
necessarily because I don't have enough time doing it.
Right. Yeah.
And
It's like
a grapevine takes 5 years to produce fruit, especially in an environment where there's a lot of competition. It could take a lot more.
yeah.
And so these vines that are growing in the forest, growing wildly, those things are like decades old. And it
Yeah.
took them 10, 15 years just to get to the top of the canopy to a point where it made sense for them to grow fruit.
Right.
And and so these wild vines are incredibly long lived. And if you're going to take that same approach with a little grapevine married to a tree, you're going to have to acknowledge that you're going to get some delayed gratification there. At least that's my experience.
Yeah.
But I don't have enough time doing it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the things that's yeah, I mean, my only context has been Los Angeles, and that's a very different thing entirely. My yard in Los Angeles is the vines definitely compete the fruit trees, but I'm using, like apples and persimmons, which aren't vigorous growing ones. Like if I was using fig, it would be a battle between the two probably. But
Yeah,
here, I don't know, it's too early to say because I got vines and trees in the ground last year, and then we had 2 months of drought, and then one of the coldest winters and recently. So they kind of got beat
yeah,
up. Quite a few of them. I don't know. We'll see how many of them survived. Quite a few survived, but I know some didn't. So we'll have to see what's going on here. It's gonna anyway. It's a hard and slow start for this little gathering of people, but we'll see what happens here.
yeah.
Um,
Speaking of a gathering of people, thanks so much for the Embracing Hybrid Grapes symposium.
oh yeah,
Not only being a part of that, but also elevating it so that we could all take part and continue to learn and hear from all of the fantastic people that were part of it to begin
well,
with.
thanks. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, Elodie and I have been talking about next year already. We were just talking last night, so definitely making plans. Have some good ideas.
If I have one experience that I've learned from my hybrid growing is that um, I've had to replant the whole vineyard in less than 10 years one time, and and that means because I've had attrition due to drought, to insects, to competition, etc. Um, Not for lack of doing my best and also ignoring my vineyard at the same time. Uh,
Sometimes those
But
are
yes,
the same thing.
yeah, and it's this trials and the errors, and the growth that you get from all of it that
Yeah,
is incredibly meaningful, and we all have so much to share and give to each other. So I love it. I love our community.
that's great. Um, what's so that's your those are your hybrids. You've only had to replant once in 10 years, you said, the full thing.
Yeah, and so with our vinifera vineyard that we planted, we being never viniferous, we are now interplanting all hybrids. Wherever there's a dead vine, a hybrid goes in its place. But we also found that, like I said, in places where these old rootstocks just can't hack it, the old family for Virginia.
Yeah.
So we were not only replacing with hybrids, but we're replacing with hybrids with higher vigor. And so eventually, this vineyard might just be Regan and Chardonnay.
Okay.
But right now it's Blanc Frankish and Cabernet Franc with Regan interplanted, and Chardonnay and Riesling and Petit Manseng with Chardonnay interplanted.
That's funny how you ended up with those too. They don't seem like, I don't know. They seem like a strange. How did you end up with Regent and Chardonnay?
Um, yeah, so again, as a grower who is perusing the catalogs and coming across one that says it's the no spray red, that
I gotcha.
it makes alarm bells go off. So I planted a half acre of it without even tasting it before because there aren't any like North American bottlings of Regent. Chardonnay has been really well known to grow in Virginia for the past several decades,
Yeah.
and it's pretty resilient to our climate as well. Um, and so these are both hybrid varieties that have quite a history behind them and a lot of genetics, um, and quite a bit of vinifera. And so at the same time, through my experimentation with both of those varieties here in my hybrids, um, it shows us what they're capable of. And they aren't no spray, but they're pretty close. And maybe no spray is not necessarily the answer, but there's a vast number of varieties that are available to us now that are incredibly exciting.
Yeah.
It was 10 years ago that the VCR varieties sort of hit the stage, and we got to taste some of their experimental bottlings, and it inspired us enough to plant some of those. And so, through my experience over the last 10 years as being a vineyard consultant, for people to work with me, they have to work with hybrids because I mean, I don't hate vinifera, but I don't want to spray vinifera. And so the folks that I've worked with over the years, we've planted things like Sauvignon Cretos and Sauvignon Ritos and Merlot Canthus,
Hmm.
lots of Chardonnay, lots of Chamberson, some Cayuga, some Vidal Blanc, you name it, the list goes on. And yet, the varieties that are becoming accessible to us now, some of them even proclaim to have some black rot resistance. Um, I have too many choices and not enough time.
That's great. That's fantastic. Yeah. Um, yeah, you said you were planting some this week. What were you planting this week?
Yeah. So I have a client who was planting an acre of Sauvignon Ritos, and then another client planted 2 acres of Sauvignon Cretos.
Okay.
My brother Ben and I, we replanted some of our Merlot Canthus that we have about a little under an acre of. And then, yeah, it's some of these kind of what are they're calling peewee varieties these days that are the most exciting for me because they have those sort of expanded resistance catalogs that just make them a little bit more capable. And for Regent, for example, Regent, again, the catalog said no spray red like Gamay, and I love Gamay, but it's not like Gamay. It's something so entirely different, and
Yeah.
yet it makes this interesting and intriguing wine. And of course, there are drawbacks to it. It loses some of its acidity close to harvest.
Mm.
And uh, but it's kind of a anecdotal name for it is Chamberson with tannin, and
That's funny.
Chamberson lacks tannin.
Okay.
Whereas Regent, it brings that fruity explosiveness, but it can take oak really well, and it has tannin.
Nice.
So win-win.
Have you played around with Petite Pearl?
Haven't. There is a producer in Northern Virginia that has Petite Pearl. I think a lot of the problems with some of
Minnesota
these
varieties?
yeah, these Minnesota varieties is that they ripen way, way too early.
Okay.
So things like Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, especially in the Piedmont, tend to ripen in early August.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the hottest time of the year. And so we don't really have those diurnal shifts that help preserve freshness and acidity. And so you're getting some flabby wines sometimes.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Okay, I was
and
going to ask.
likewise, like Marquette, that'd be a fun variety to grow,
Uh-huh.
but it also ripened it ripened way too early.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I think when I get back to LA, my Marquette will be ripe actually, like in 2 weeks. Like
yeah,
it was already going through Veraison on March 12th. That's funny.
but where you said though that it could be complementary to your
There it could be
climate.
complimentary, yeah. Yeah, no, and I was thinking about that, like with something like Petite Pearl, which it's not super high acid, but it has good acidity. I wonder if it would even sort of like do okay. I the only reason I brought it up because if we're comparing to vinifera flavors, like it's the closest I've found to like something that you would think of Gamay like, in terms of it's got that sort of darker berried thing, does really well with uh what am I trying to say, carbonic maceration,
Hmm.
very similar to Gamay, like if or some percentage carbonic really gives you sort of a beautiful wine,
Yeah,
or total, anyway,
yeah,
just a thought.
yeah,
But yeah.
yeah. Regent will do that for you too.
Oh, nice.
I Again, a lot of these varieties too, Sauvignon Cretos, Ritos, they're very Sauvignon Blanc-esque. Um, Yet these are our first time making wines with them. I've only
Yeah.
made a varietal Regent once, and I loved it. Um, and I can't wait to make it again. I just have to figure out how to control my partners in feeding, which are the deer.
Floreal, I think, is another very Sauvignon Blanc flavored
Yes,
grape.
Floreal is available.
Uh-huh.
Unfortunately, a lot of these varieties that are kind of new and hitting the scene, these nurseries won't give you just 5 or 10 to experiment with.
Right.
You really have to twist their arm to get them to do it. And even if you do that, they're like, "Don't tell anybody."
Right.
And they're forcing you to buy an acre or half an acre's worth of fruit before you even try it,
Right.
and that's problematic for me. I don't have the resources to just throw um, 500 vines out if I'm not fully invested in the outcome. And so, Floreal, yes, we're going to trial it next year because we're buying into it because it has a little bit of that black rot resistance.
Nice. Yeah, I wonder if like you could do a cooperative buy with some other growers, so you
Yeah,
all
I've
you all end up with like an eighth of an acre worth kind of thing.
absolutely. And yeah, one of your leading growers that's doing amazing things in Virginia, Carl Hamp, he's already reached out and
Oh,
said, "Hey, I
fantastic.
heard you were talking about Floreal." And I was like, "Yeah, can you help lower this burden of entry for us?"
Fantastic. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Sounds like a great place. Sounds like some exciting stuff is happening in Virginia. Really, very cool to hear all about what you're doing and the community of people that are participating in this, and non-people, non-human people. Um, I mean, I've kept you for so long. Anything that we missed or that you wanted to say that I haven't asked you about,
um,
or closing shots
no.
of any kind?
Yeah, so this 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 simple yet complex life that we lead, there's never enough time to
Yeah.
accomplish everything. And you almost just have to wade in somewhere and start swimming. And with a lot of what we're doing with the farm and with my personal growing and my consulting is always push limits and experiment and observe and record. And whether it's a recording through anecdotal experience or you're actually just recording uh, bud break of your grapevines across time, like all of that, if we collectively share and um, give what we have and what we know, uh, we can all advance faster. But without sort of this collective, this community, um, sort of the openness and open source of information, we're all just kind of working in our own little silos and islands, and we're not progressing like we could be.
Hmm.
And so, seeing programs like Embracing Hybrid Grapes, like Anything But Vinifera, those are the, like, I don't know, those are the heartbeats to me of the future of wine. And I am I cannot say enough thanks to not only the folks that run ABV, but to you, Embracing Hybrid Grapes across the world. Folks have been growing ecologically, mindfully, and yet we we can't bridge like the barriers to each other's understanding without that community. And so it just seems community is such a loaded word, but it's the connectivity that comes out of it, the creativity, the new ideas, um, the collaborative elements. Uh, we can't pursue what we want to pursue without it. And I'm so thankful for it.
Me too. And I'm thankful for you. Thanks, Tim. I really appreciate this conversation. It's been really fun, and yeah, you're working at a level that I'm jealous of and admire. So keep it up. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. You are also working at a level of admiration and incredible respect. Without you uh, conglomerating all of this knowledge into a space that is incredibly accessible for so many people through time to come, thank you immensely.
Ah, my pleasure. Thank you. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. And if you did, would you leave a great review on your podcast app? It is a huge help to getting the word out about this podcast. Thank you in whatever way you support, even just by listening. Thank you so much. And thanks again to our sponsor for this episode, Shifting Gears Travel. Check them out, take a tour. And a big thanks for the opening and closing music to Colden Pro, the minstrel of the vines, the strumming viticulturist. And on lead vocals, we've got the Songbird Singers. A big thanks to them, as always.